All right, here we are live again. How are you, man?
I'm doing good. Doing good,
Good.
thanks.
So it is Jose. Is it Luis or Luis?
Luis. Yeah.
And I'm going to try the last name.
Okay.
Oseguera.
Yeah, perfect.
Well, it's funny. Have you traced the origins of that?
Yeah, actually I have. It apparently it goes back to Spain, and it's the name of a little town.
Okay.
So,
Because my girlfriend's name is Aseguera.
oh,
And
okay.
yeah, and she's Basque, which
Okay.
is just
Yeah,
on that.
exactly.
So when I saw this, I'm like, man, that is so close.
Yeah,
Uh, the, the the title there.
yeah.
So awesome. And I have not showed this. Let's see. There we go. You can actually see it there. So I've been enjoying your book of poetry,
Thank
and
you.
I think I've discovered something. So I have an answer, but I want you to answer it first.
Okay.
How should people read poetry?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I feel that with poetry, um, you kind of need to bring your own experience to it. So it's almost like it's poetry is something you can just pick up and just read it. You don't need to know any background. It should be something that it's almost like food. You just eat it and you taste it and you just let your body metabolize it, and that's it. There shouldn't be anything more than that.
Right. And that is a great analogy because for me, you wouldn't probably also eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
So, because I sat down with your book and I haven't read a poetry book in a little bit. I've read a decent amount, but I realized at one point you can't just read a book of poetry. Like it's like going to an art gallery. You don't just run through the gallery looking at every painting. You need to sit there and you read one poem. It's like you almost can't just read more than two or three at in a setting. You can't like spend an hour reading a book of poetry, at least in my opinion.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it doesn't digest for me properly. You kind of need to read it and like kind of feel it. And like each poem is a separate book almost.
Yeah.
Although in the beginning, some of yours connect together.
Hmm.
Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I like your analogy of the gallery because yeah, each poem in a collection, each poem was created by the writer as an individual being almost. So when it's placed in a collection, there is some sort of thematical tie-ins here and there, but you're right, it's its own thing. So um, the way I like to read poetry, other people's poetry, is I read it once, and if it really hits me, I read it again, and I might read it like 5 times because I really like certain phrasing. There might be parts of it that I want to maybe use as a title for one of my pieces, so kind of like a remix. Uh, so yeah, I agree. It's poetry. It could be a little more dense with ideas. With sometimes they're philosophical, so you need to really think about them and kind of let them live inside of you for a little bit.
Yeah, because if you just jump onto the next one, you don't really get to, you can just read through it, but
Hmm.
you don't get, it doesn't get inside of your DNA
Hmm.
if you just jump from one to the next. I found that I had to read one and then sit with it or just be like, okay, and then pick it up again later, like, like having a cigarette or something.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
Not just going one after another like an addiction.
Yeah.
So you have writers that you were influenced by?
Yeah, yeah. I there's a few writers that I like. One of them is an Irish poet. His name is Seamus Heaney, and he's an older poet. He has a ton of books, poetry. Another one, more recent one, is her name is Ada Limon, and her poetry is it makes me want to become a better poet just reading her stuff. She has a really beautiful poem about the national anthem, how she sees the national anthem could be improved, and it's political, but at the same time it's art. It's beautiful. So yeah, I would say those two are probably some of my favorite poets right now.
Yeah, I've read a lot of the Charles Bukowski poetry,
Yeah.
which there was little elements, especially the first half of the book has kind of a little different vibe than the second half.
Hmm.
And the first half has some of that because it's like childhood in Los Angeles. And so it reminded me of that. And then, do you know Oscar Zeta Acosta?
I don't know.
So have you read Hunter Thompson? Or
I
do you
haven't.
see Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, the movie with Johnny Depp?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, that was based on Hunter Thompson's writing,
Okay.
and his sidekick, who he called his attorney,
Yeah.
was Oscar Zeta Acosta. And
Okay.
he said, and I don't even know if you're allowed to say these things anymore, but he called his writing Chicano art.
Okay.
And, and he wrote a book called, I have them written down, I read both of them, Brown Buffalo and Revolution of the Cockroach People. And
Mm.
it's about like 60s Mexican American Los Angeles. And so since that was my, because your poetry is sometimes in Spanish.
Yeah, there are a few words here and there that don't really translate that well into English. I mean, I feel like, I mean, you can translate pretty much any language into any language, but it loses the poetry in the language itself.
Right.
Um, so that's why I choose to write certain words, certain passages in Spanish.
Yeah, it gave me like a very it was a good vibe. Like it had a like earthiness to it, kind of because I didn't know what it meant either. So
Yeah,
but then there was this other thing, so then I'd have to ask or look it up, and
yeah.
which was cool. Do you do that in all of your work, or just when it prompts you?
You know what? It just, yeah, it's kind of like a feeling you get when you're writing something and you just want to say it, just the way that it's said, and you don't really want to belabor it too much because I don't know. It's kind of like trying to season a dish. You want to add a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, but you don't want to add too much seasoning because then the actual ingredients, the individual components, the flavors that the ingredients bring to the table then gets lost. So I feel that that's the same with language. I mean, I chose to write in English because it's my primary language, even though I come from a Mexican background. But Spanish was my first language, so I do gravitate towards it when it comes to something that is more visceral, more emotional. So that's why I tend to add those little Spanish nuggets here and there whenever I feel that Spanish is the best language to use to give me that color.
When you hear the thoughts in your head, what language are they in?
They're in English, and also when I dream, it's in English. So
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Yeah, that's funny. And I
yeah,
always think about that with someone who's lucky enough to know two languages, because I do not. But I know some
yeah,
people that know three. But
yeah.
I'm always curious about like the thoughts or the dreaming. Which is that the dominant language then?
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy just the subconscious how it works and how we know so little of it, even though we've come so far with science and psychology is just that I feel that that's where poetry really comes from. It comes from the subconscious level where you're not always aware where the ideas come from, and sometimes they come from you, they come from something you read, something you watched. So yeah, it's amazing.
So and then that's the question I want to ask is, do you just start to hear the poetry, or do you sit down with a blank piece of paper and go, I'm going to write a poem?
That's funny because I actually I do start off maybe with like a phrase, or if I'm reading someone else's poetry and there's a line that really strikes me, really strikes a chord in me, then I'll write down that line, and then I'll start using that line almost as a prompt to build on an emotion that I felt when I read that, or something, a memory that was recalled when I read that line. So I guess to answer your question, it has to start from a feeling, from maybe I'm watching a movie or something. Something needs to trigger that piece. Uh, I rarely find myself sitting down and kind of chiseling out at a page, because I feel that I mean, I've never really had writer's block, but I feel like that if you want to have writer's block, that's a good way of getting writer's block, sitting in front of a blank page. So yeah, that's my approach.
Were you educated at all as a writer?
Actually, as a young kid, I've always liked to write. I used to write plays, and I used to have my siblings, act them out. I have a younger brother and a sister, and so I would write stuff. I've always been interested in, making people laugh. So I would always, as a kid, I would write, jokes down, and so that's really where my love for writing came from, was, you know, doing that kind of stuff, and also listening to my aunts and uncles, tell stories about when they were young, growing up in Mexico, or stories about my grandparents when they were young. So I was always surrounded by storytelling, and it just felt right when I started writing, for real. It felt right, because I felt like I had a lot of stories to tell, and a lot of thoughts to put down on paper.
Yeah, and you mentioned your family, so a lot of the stuff you're writing, is it autobiography about you?
Uh, yeah, yeah, it is about me. A lot of it is about me. It's based on my life, my upbringing, but some of it is also mixed with just the culture, Mexican American culture, the Mexican American experience, in particular the immigrant experience. And so some of it is just uh, things that I've seen in other people. So uh, some of the pieces have, you could say, a fictional side to them as well, a metaphorical side to them. But yeah, for the most part, it's about my life and my experiences.
But you don't edit yourself if it like kind of goes out of the bounds of your life, and like, is there like artistic freedom, like, well, this is going to be a really cool poem if I say this, but maybe it's not quite the truth?
Uh, yeah, you know what? Because with poetry, it almost has that ethereal side to it, where you can write about your dreams, and your dreams might, involve things that are not real, or, that most people wouldn't even consider, you know, reality, or, anything close to it. So I feel that if you're writing a piece, and you come across this, fork in the road, should I stick to the truth, to the historical fact, or should I go in with what feels right for the piece, what feels right for the idea? Then it's up to each poet to, or each writer, to choose a side. I choose to go with what feels right for the piece, because at the end of the day, I'm writing poetry. I'm not writing, my autobiography or history.
Right.
So yeah, so I kind of just go with what feels right. And then to add to that, we were talking about the subconscious. I mean, a lot of our memories are stored there. So it, even if we remember something, you know, for what we think it was, what really happened, it might not have been that way. So we're still kind of veering off anyway, even if we try to stick to what we thought really happened.
Yeah, do you think that our memories are solid, or do you think they're ever changing?
You know what? I think that our memories, um, depending on how whatever we're trying to remember, how what kind of an impact that had on our lives, I think that that kind of set is a foundation of how true or false a memory could be, or how accurate a memory could be. But I think as we grow up and we get older and we experience different things, you know, we love, we experience heartbreak, you know, we you know, do different things as adults. I feel like those memories tend to have a different interpretation. Um, for example, some of the pieces that I wrote, I really had to remember, try to think about my relationship with my mother, which she's a major character in there. Um, and I recently had a son, and you know, reviewing these poems and reading them again, you know, with having become a father, uh, it allowed me to have more empathy for my mom and the struggles that she went through. And um, yeah, so the memories that I had of her, where I found that she was being unfair, or she was being, you know, mean or whatever, they took on a different interpretation, because I had now I'm the one that has to be mean. It has to be, uh, you know, responsible, and has to make those tough decisions for my son. So yeah, it definitely changes with depending on where you are in life.
Yeah, it's interesting that our different experiences um, kind of adjust
Hmm.
our memories,
Yeah.
or we see other parts of the world and we go through different things, and then something we thought this memory meant this something here 10, 20 years ago, now over here it's kind of the same memory, but with a
Mhm.
different vibe on it. That's a trip, man.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind
Yeah.
of like listening to music that, you know, you might have grown up listening to, like, you know, Beatles or, you know, whatever, and then you listen to it again as an adult. You actually start discovering different things from it that when you were younger you probably didn't even notice. You were just listening to the music, you like the rhythm, but then you start reading the lyrics, and you start reading them as even poetry, and you start discovering different things about the music and about yourself, and even sometimes even about the artist, you know, about the, you know, what each individual songwriter was going through.
Yeah, that's. I think that you mentioned magic a few times in the book, and I actually have I've bended a page over. But it's funny that you mentioned music because, as a player of music, I have found, like, just experiencing the music for the first couple of times. There's all this magic, and it's all this, like, you're like, wow, and it's like it's never ending. And then if I sit down and learn what the musicians are doing, that
Mhm.
magic starts to disappear, and I almost don't want to like, I almost don't want to learn it, because the minute I learn it, then it's like knowing the trick or something. It doesn't
Mhm.
have the same impact. um,
Exactly.
yeah.
It's totally right. Yeah, it's almost like you know, taking it on my side. I mean, when you read poetry, the poet's words are there, and obviously they're using a certain structure, a certain form. But I feel like I would never want to know, even if I got to speak to one of these poets that I admire, you know, how they write or what their process was. Because yeah, you're right. It would take that magic away from, that mystery, that mystique away from their words and from their writing.
Okay. Is it important to you that the reader experiences something specific, or that they just experience anything?
Um, I think that my ultimate goal when I write something is I want to show the reader something, whether it's something to do with love, something to do with, you know, with pain, or, and so I want to take them on this journey with me. But at the same time, I want them to notice different things that maybe I didn't even notice that were there. kind of like going on a road trip. You know, you're taking somebody to, to see something, a landmark or something, but on the way there, the person riding next to you is going to see different things on the road. They're going to notice different things. So that's kind of the way I see my writing is, I want to take you somewhere, but I also want you to just enjoy the ride and experience different things that I'm not necessarily showing to you.
Yeah, have you got feedback like that where someone read something and then they had this whole other kind of story about it and you're like, whoa, that's not really what I wrote. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh man, that's a possibility.
Yeah, yeah. Especially when I write something with to do with my growing up in, in an urban setting where uh, you know you're writing about your life and about what you've experienced as a young person in LA, and then somebody who didn't necessarily grow up there will start noticing connections between what you experienced and then kind of like the backdrop of that poem. Um, there was one in particular where I wrote about growing up in the San Fernando Valley and hanging out with a lot of kids that were, either doing drugs or they were involved in gangs, and how sometimes the police would, see you walking down the street and they would automatically think that you were up to no good. Um, and so there was a coworker of mine who read the piece and they made this connection, which I didn't implicitly put it there, but I guess, he saw it there where the police as well as the children from that neighborhood were trained to kind of butt heads. It wasn't that that relationship was organic. It was the fact that each side was kind of raised to be against the other. So police were trained to kind of be suspicious of these kind of children, and then these children were raised to be suspicious of the police. So he
Right.
saw that connection, and I didn't really write those words, but he expressed that to me, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't see that.
Yeah, it's interesting how our narratives can collide,
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
different cultures or different jobs, or because I always felt as a kid, and it's sometimes weird for me to talk about it now in our current situation, but in where I grew up, I always felt like the police were out for me. Every time I was driving, I was getting pulled over all the time. And,
Hmm.
I was like the long haired guy in town. And
Yeah.
like, and they were probably thinking, well, the long haired guy is the guy that does drugs, or whatever. And so then we had this, not even knowing each other, had through our cultural ideas
Hmm.
created enemies with each other, um, unknowingly, like, and it became this the story, our story of two strangers
Hmm.
already having a pre-existing story. That's dangerous. That's
Yeah.
funny.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's something um, that I try to not. I'm not trying to be political in any way with my writing. I have written pieces where I do address racial bias or racial discrepancies, especially when being a Hispanic person. But ultimately, that's not my goal. I'm not trying to convert anybody or make anybody believe anything. I only use it when it's part of the story, part of the narrative of the poem. Because you're right, it's a very it could be constructive depending on how you use it, and it can also be destructive depending on the circumstances.
Right. How much of this is like therapeutic for you and possibly for your reader?
It is pretty therapeutic in the sense that I get to revisit uh, traumatic, maybe, or even a painful part of my past, because I get to see it from different angles. I get to see it over and over again. So it kind of blunts the effect. And uh, I imagine it might be therapeutic for my reader in the sense that uh, they get to see another side of somebody's life, and maybe say, you know what, those things that I've been feeling all my life, they're somebody else felt them too, and there could be some it could alleviate some stress for some people. Maybe they, by comparison, because we tend to compare ourselves to everybody, unwittingly or on purpose. And so they might say, oh, this person had a hard life and they were able to make something positive with it. So maybe that will allow them to try to do the same with their own experience.
Yeah. And you said something about like looking at it from different angles. I've gone through phases in and out where I've written poetry myself. I haven't written in a long time. I barely edited. So you said different. Do you go back and revise it quite a bit? Is there a process for that? Does it change poem to poem?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like my pieces do go through different phases. There's I guess the free write phase where you just kind of write everything and anything that just pops into your head, and then you go back. I go back and kind of try to pare it down, just keep the theme as strong as possible, and then if I'm going to submit it for publication, then I'll go back again and do more editing. And this time, the last phase, I would say, and again, it depends from poem to poem. Some of them take 10 different phases. Some of them take two. But it's always interesting to see how the one line that survived, or the few lines that survived from the very first draft, like unchanged.
Right.
And there's really nothing. There is no clue or anything that will predict that. And I feel that that's the amazing part, that you wrote an idea down, and then it went through all these different phases of editing, and then at the end it remained pure. It remained a pure thought. And I feel that that's, if you can have that in at least one line in a poem, then it's a great thing. It's almost magical.
Yeah. Are those pure thoughts often the first thing that brings you to the paper, or are they something that come throughout the process?
They come throughout the process, and there have been moments when I'm either right before I go to bed, or I'm walking the dog or something, and I'll see something, and I'll think of a line, or I'll think of a word, and I'll write it in my phone, or I'll write it on a piece of paper. Those moments, they tend to those pure thoughts, they tend to stay till the end. The ones that just kind of strike you and stop you on your tracks, they tend to stay there because they're just so strong. Um, you're so invested in them that they make you stop doing whatever you're doing and write them down. So
So you're conscious of that. Are you delicate with the purity of that? Like being cautious not to, chip away at it too much.
yeah, I've when I write when I start writing the final version, or the final few phases of it, I'll transfer. I'll do this thing where I'll transfer my work. I'll write it down on a notebook. I'll transfer it over to Google Docs or whatever, and then I'll start working on it. And then Google Docs does this thing where it'll save a different version of each change. So there'll be times where I have done that, where I'll have a thought that I really like, and then I'll like screw it up by just edit over and over that same line. And then sometimes I'll have to go back in the history of that document and then find out what it was originally. And sometimes the original version of it is the best version of it. So I'll just go back and copy and paste. But yeah, that has happened where you try to just um, almost like imbue that line with more of something, and it ends up ruining the purity, the simplicity of the line.
Yeah, technology can be useful in that situation,
Yeah.
being able to go back and do that. Do you think that writing on paper has a different spirit quality than typing into a machine?
Yeah, for sure. Even after I type the piece into the computer, what I'll do is um, before I add I finalize it and I submit it to an editor, I'll actually rewrite the whole thing on paper again because
Oh,
I need to feel it in my hands. I need to feel the curves of the letters and how they look, how they read back to me. If I feel like I'm writing something and it feels like laborious, then I'll just get rid of that line because it's almost like if I'm bored or if I'm uh, if I don't like writing this line on paper, then what makes me think that somebody's going to want to read it? So it also helps me become more economical, bringing it back on paper, making it real again in the real world, and uh, it allows me to really refine the piece by making it uh, by writing it down on paper and then putting it back into the computer.
yeah. Are you writing, you printing or the old cursive? Because you said the curvature of the line. So I saw cursive. I don't know how many people even still know what that is. How do you write it down?
It's funny because I learned cursive. I think it was like fourth, third grade, and what it did for me is that it kind of created this hybrid with my writing. So when I write on a piece of paper, it'll have a character. It will have both natures kind of combined. It'll have the cursive and the regular writing. I guess I don't know what non-cursive, but it'll be a little bit of both. So when I'm writing something, it'll have the connective tissue of the cursive, but it'll also be just it looks like regular print as well.
Is your hand just moving or are you thinking about putting it down?
Yeah, I mean it just yeah, I guess it's just moving.
Yeah. Are there times when you can't read what you wrote?
Yeah, yeah, it kind of just happens, just whenever, I guess.
Right. Is there a rhythm?
Um, you know, it's funny. It's almost like um, I guess because it's a pencil and in a piece of flat paper, there is a sort of percussive nature to it. Like the sound of the pencil or pen, scratching up against the piece of paper. But it also almost has like a woodwind quality to it as well, in that um, I mean, because writing doesn't take, writing is mechanical. It doesn't take any breath or anything, but your body does. So um, you don't really think of it this way when you're writing, but you're expending energy, so it takes breath. So every time I write a line, I have to take a breath and then write it and
Uh,
then again. So it's almost like when I'm in the middle of something good, I'll just keep writing, and I'll find myself that I've been holding my breath the whole time because it's just it's a phrase. It's
yeah.
literally a phrase, a musical phrase and a written phrase.
Yeah, the writer Hunter S. Thompson, who your writing reminded me of his partner in the movie and in his life.
Mhm.
When he decided he wanted to be a writer, he sat down with a typewriter and then typed the books that he liked. I think he typed The Great Gatsby or something. The
Mhm.
entire He would read it and type it because he wanted to get the rhythm of these great writers. And once he typed the entire book, he had like this rhythm inside of him, and he could learn like
Mhm.
through that the rhythm was like the important part to him of those stories and the words. And yeah, it's almost like, well, I don't know, in his case, or
Mhm.
it almost wasn't about the words as it was about like some kind of message underneath the words, and the way that that rhythm happened, or that the tonal quality of it, you said like a woodwind, that sent a message that went along with the actual words.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a under message? There's a message in the rhythm of it, and that is maybe connected or not connected to the story?
Yeah, for sure. Like whenever I want to write something, whenever I feel like writing, I feel or whenever it's time for me to write, I have like a gap in the day where I can sit down and write for an hour or two. I'll actually start off by uh, reading a poet that I like, or reading an excerpt from a book that I like, and it has to be from an author or writer that I really really like, that I'm to a point where I'm jealous that I'm not that right. I'm not as good as that writer.
Right.
And so I'll read a paragraph or two, sometimes a few pages, and then that'll get me not only in the mood, but it just makes me a better writer. I wish I knew how to explain that, but it's like magic. You read I know Kurt Vonnegut. You read a few pages of him, or even Orson. Sorry, not Orwell. Sorry, I'm getting them confused. Orwell, the author of 1984. I'll read some of his short stories, and just the way he writes, it's so visceral and direct. I feel like I almost like take on those skills myself. I feel
Yeah.
I become the writer, and then I write my stuff.
Do you find that like after you're reading a certain author for a certain amount of time that it changes the rhythm and the pattern of your thoughts?
Yes, yes, I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Without, anytime I read Bukowski, like I said, I've read a lot, and he's like a Los Angeles. He was an immigrant from Germany. He came here. He grew up in East Hollywood and all around. So for me, that's why some of it connected to your stories, because it's Los Angeles stories, you know.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
you talk about the same streets and stuff. But when I'm reading him for long periods of time, all of a sudden, like I'm driving in my car and I'm thinking about work or something, but I'm thinking about work in this rhythm that is Charles Bukowski. You know, like all of a sudden I've been like brainwashed, and his uh, way or his rhythm has completely changed the way that my brain is working.
Yeah.
That's a powerful, man.
Yeah, yeah, especially with Bukowski. I've read a lot of his stuff, and short stories and poetry. I haven't read any of his novels yet, but that's something that I really want to do. But yeah, he's one of those writers that really takes you along on this journey, and it's almost like you're this little kid holding his hand as he's taking you into his world, and he's teaching you, basically saying, reteaching you how to look at the world, and telling you, the way that you were taught to look at this, that's BS. Don't think of it that way. He's kind of like taking care of you, and giving you new ways of seeing things. So at least that's how I see Bukowski when I read his stuff.
Yeah, that's funny. I never thought about that too much, but he does have a tendency to kind of like pull the curtain back and get
Yeah.
all the way. I remember there's this interview with Bono from U2, and he says, Bukowski like gets into the marrow of the bone, all the way
Hmm.
down, like he boils it down to the most like simplest
Yeah.
thing, and then gives it to you, and you can like a child could understand it, and
Yeah.
um, it's an amazing use of simplicity. I read his early work, and it was much more like flashy, and it didn't reach me the same as it seemed like at some point, almost like this is a wrong word, but like he kind of gave up and then
Hmm.
just went to this real simple writing, as opposed to like trying to be a writer and using big words and stuff, which I think he did in the beginning, but then moving over to this simplicity, and the simplicity had this power of like being hit by a car. It's like so simple. It's just like, you know,
Yeah.
impact.
Yeah, he got to a level where he was almost it was philosophical, and many of his writings are very philosophical, but philosophical in the sense that you could understand, and you could see it in your own life, and you could see it in the life of others. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, it's like he's writing for you
Hmm.
or for
Exactly.
yeah, it's amazing. It's
Yeah.
amazing. There's a lot of mention of Catholicism in your work.
Hmm.
So there's a big impact there. You want to expand on that at all?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in a pretty conservative evangelical Christian family. But my mom and her siblings grew up Catholic. Essentially, they because most Mexicans tend to be Catholic, and so my grandmother didn't really, and the rest of her family didn't really convert to evangelical Christianity until they were uh, way into adulthood. So a lot of what they believed in is deeply rooted in Catholicism, and then that was transferred into the third generation, which is me and my cousins. So yes, there are a lot of mentions to it because I don't consider myself a religious person, but it is a big part of my upbringing. The way that I saw right and wrong, morals and all that stuff. So it did creep its way into my life, and now when I write, I do use a lot of religious imagery and metaphors because, again, it's something that is so innate and so, how can I say it, so natural in my life that I don't even see it as, oh, I'm going to write about God because, believing in God is good. No, I see it more as like, I grew up, liking pizza, and, I grew up liking The Simpsons. I grew up going to church, that it's kind of like on that level where it was just part of my upbringing. And yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, like how society or has been imprinted by these things.
Hmm.
And it's interesting back to what you said about the thing with the kids walking down the street and the police and your friend having this realization about, these mythologies and these stories.
Hmm.
So religion has like a very similar kind of like we have these understandings. And like I had this weird experience where so the snake,
Hmm.
if you're Catholic, the snake has a representation,
Yeah.
that and it's darkness and it's something that you want to stay away from. I remember there's
Hmm.
a church that I went to in Ohio when I was a kid, and there was a statue of Mary, and she was standing on a snake, and the snake's like and he's under
Yeah.
her feet, and like that was a big impact for like a child's mind.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
um, but then fast forward three odd decades, and
Hmm.
I'm in India, right?
Yeah.
Snake is a completely different creature in uh, Hindu philosophy. The snake
Yeah.
represents power, and he's associated with the deities in this very positive way.
Hmm.
And you get this reframing. It's like someone just like turned the table, and you're like, whoa,
Yeah.
everything doesn't mean the same anymore.
Hmm.
Those are beautiful moments to,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the poetry of life. It's very interesting.
Yeah. It's funny because yeah, you totally nailed it. It is a poetry of life because you do come to different places in life, especially as an adult, and you look at certain imagery, in this case, a snake, and you've always associated it with something negative or evil, and then you have a friend, or you do your own research, you read different books, and you realize that symbol that you grew up fearing, or trying to stay away from, is actually something very positive. And that's happened to me multiple times, especially when I do research for my writing, in that you know I encounter other religions, and I feel connected to them, and I take little bits from Buddhism, little bits from Hinduism, little bits from any religion that I encounter that I find has something positive or something to give me in order to improve my life. That's what I like to do, and uh, and I do the same with Christianity. I take the parts that I feel apply to my life, and I just uh, set aside the ones that I don't agree with. So yeah.
You think that's a continued reinventing of our understanding of the world around us.
Mm-hmm.
Because with the more experiences, then the more we can have a chance to, because you can really see, especially in the world that we're living in right now, the people that never left their backyard. You
Mm-hmm.
know, those
Yeah.
people have these very cemented ideas about the world and right and wrong and where they belong. And then the people that, well, that have been curious enough to go and look at other dogmas or other stories or other cultures. It's like this, again, it's like the tables, you're suddenly sitting at a different table, although it was the same table all along, but
Mm-hmm.
now it's very different, you know.
Yeah.
Um, Even with different foods, you know, and different, um, all these things, I encourage people to search around.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, 'cause it's scary to look beyond what you've been told.
Yeah, exactly. And it's sometimes it's even scary to look at yourself within a new context. You know, you're told when you grow well, as you're raised, you know, in a traditional setting, you're told you're this way, and you're told that you're that way throughout your life, and then when you're outside of that environment, that family environment, or you know, that the environment of, you know, your town or whatever, then you have to reassess yourself, and reassess those myths that you were told about yourself. And then um, that's I feel that's where the real challenge comes from. Where do you choose to follow what you were always told, or are you willing to step out and really find out who you are? Um, and at least through writing, that has allowed me to ask myself those questions. You know, am I this way because of where I came from, or am I this way because that's who I am? And in either side of that question, you always have the power to do something about it, at least when it comes to yourself.
Yeah. And then there seems to be like this polling, like the people that you came from, some of them, they're like, well, be true to your roots, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
But it's funny because your roots are based in a mythology that is based on not looking beyond the
Hmm.
space that you're in. So your roots are based in, to me, in like a blindness. And
Hmm.
then too, you can, you know, it's like, well, you're blue collar, and your family was blue collar, and you know, and your father's father and father's father, they fought in the wars, and we are the, you know, we are the salt of the earth or whatever. And now, how do you expect to go to this other parts of the world and then be somebody other than that? Because you know this is who you are. There's I don't not my family, but there are people that don't want you to explore that because it means that they would have to explore it, and that's frightening. And you
Yeah.
have to have like guts, you know, to question maybe the snake isn't bad, you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah. No, exactly. And when as you're trying to discover yourself as a person, and I feel that with, you know, everything that's going on with COVID and the quarantine, and you know, safer at home, I feel that a lot of people are they're being asked to face those things that they've been maybe ignoring, or they've been, you know, trying to drown out with technology, or you know, their jobs or whatever. You know, now that they're home all day with themselves, they for some reason uh, can't face these things that are coming up. Um, and on a personal note, I've had to, you know, deal with some things in my own personality that I kind of knew that were there, but you know, they would never really, you know, reach the surface. So um, and again, whole question, whether is it something that I learned on my own, or is something that I was raised with. And um, you know, again, having had a son, uh, in the last year has really allowed me to ask those questions and really seek answers, because he'll ask those questions someday as well. Am I this way because my dad made me this way, or am I this way because this is just who I am genetically, or just biologically? Am I this way?
Yeah, and I mean, there's studies that say that the trauma of your ancestors is in your DNA. You
Yeah,
know, there's been a lot of studies on that. So um, some of it is in your bones.
mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean necessarily that that's the only way and that it's the absolute truth, but it's deep printing, very
Mm-hmm.
deep printing. Yeah. Well, I'm going to actually read a tiny, tiny little piece from one of your poems called Pacts with the Devil, because there
Okay.
was a part in there that really jumped out for me. And I don't think I have the rhythm down. And there's actually, I think, a word in here that I may misquote. So, and I'm going to start in the middle of a paragraph, which is horrible. But then, and if you can address it or not address it.
Okay.
And I'm beginning with and. So, and I began to dream about the town my grandma was born, where witchcraft was the farmer's only access to medical care, even though the church forbade it. I really like that. I like there's a picture in my head when I read that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like there's like cultural ideas in that. And then there's also like this idea that like of when the time comes, people may be willing to compromise
Mm-hmm.
their imprinting
Yeah.
because their survival is potentially dependent upon it. You know, where
Mm-hmm.
a Catholic would consult a witch
Mm-hmm.
because they don't have medical uh, care. That's very interesting to me. Now, so you see the depth that I saw that in.
Mm-hmm.
Is that your message in that very small sentence?
Yeah, it's almost and you read it really well. I thank you for for reading that. Yeah, I see it that way where I think when it comes down to it, we tend to go back to where our roots or something uh, that we are very close to or very dear to. And in that particular passage, it was based on a story my mom told me about that, where um, her grandfather, which would be my great grandfather. Um, yeah. I'm trying to like do familial math in my head, but yeah. So that band in that poem um, apparently uh, sought out like a midwife, which I mean over there the midwives were more like shamans, and they had certain powers, and people believed that they could be healed by them. Um, so uh, even though they were Catholic, to to society, they would still seek these people, these knowledgeable people, these people that had wisdom of herbs and the earth. And um, in my opinion, when I heard that story, my mom, she sort of told it to me as like oh, like kind of how crazy were your ancestors, sort of way. But in my mind, I was more like, why aren't we doing that now? I mean,
Right.
why can't we go back to that? Why can't we go back to the things that actually worked? Because in my opinion, institutionalized religion doesn't really work. I feel that if somebody needs to be helped by somebody else, it needs to be a personal connection. You actually need to know that person, and you need to know what they need, and you need to know just so much about them in order to even be able to cause any change or even be invested in helping them. And so that's where that line came from. That I mean, just the poem in general has to do with my wife and I. We had, you know, a miscarriage, and that piece, that part of the piece kind of was my attempt of just trying to get some sort of sense of what happened, and could there have been a way to prevent that, and could magic have prevented that, you know, because obviously praying didn't do anything. So
Right.
yeah.
And what's interesting that we call it magic. I have someone who approached me about doing a podcast, like kind of trade thing, and I think they're going to be on the next one. And their podcast is about shamanism or something. And like some of this, what you're talking about. So sort of like thinking about that, like, so if someone comes to me and says, I have a stomach ache, and I make them anise tea, and it makes their stomach ache go away, am I a witch? You know? And like, how do we frame these things? Again, like the snake, you know, it's like, so if someone knows that you take this herb and this herb, and it makes your body react in a certain way, like, how in the fuck is that witchcraft? You know,
Yeah.
but it's very interesting how we place these ideas in our head and our DNA in our mind. Yeah.
And the funny thing is that I find is that it's almost like as a regular human being on Earth, I feel like we kind of tread both sides. We straddle both sides, where, you know, we'll go to the doctor if, you know, if my hand is cut off, but if I feel a fever, I'll just, you know, I'll drink some tea, or I'll take some, you know, prescription drugs, or you know, natural herbs, and I'll go to sleep, and then I'll feel fine the next day. So it's almost like in a real sense, we do believe in magic. We believe that, you know, that these sort of natural healing methods work. But then I feel like when something happens, and based on the way we're raised, it requires a doctor's you know, expertise, then we tend to go to the doctor, but we don't tend to take care of it ourselves. And it just reminds me of this one time we took my son to the pediatrician, and my son was dehydrated for a few days. And so what we did was we mixed a little bit of juice into his water. And so he really likes, you know, to drink sweet things. So we thought just a little bit of juice isn't going to hurt him. So then he started drinking a lot more water after that, and, you know, that went away. But when we told the doctor kind of slapped our wrists, and he said, no, you should offer him water until he drinks it. We're like, that's what we did. You know, we've been doing the whole time, and he hates the way water tastes. But it's almost like, from his perspective, he can't tell us that what we did was right, even though that was, you know, instinctual. That's something that any parent would have done, just to have their child drink water. But because he stands for a, you know, certain institution, he can't say that what we did is right. He has to go with what science, you know.
Well, it's funny because I have two stories that go very similar to that. One, my brother went to the doctor because he was drinking water all day long, and they told him, you're drowning your internal organs, put something else in the water, which would be what you did, and then the water will hold inside of you better because of the way the molecules interact with something else, because strictly water is continually flushing you. So that was the right thing. And his doctor told him what you did, which your doctor said not to do, which is hilarious. And my father was out here visiting me, and he was dehydrated, and he ended up going to the hospital. And the doctor came in, and I was like, he looked like he was like 25 or something, man. I was like, what the fuck? And he goes, you know, just drink some Gatorade. And so I say to the doctor, you know, what about coconut water? And the doctor's like, oh, I don't know. And I was just, it freaked me out. That's very interesting. Yeah.
but yeah, it's again, it's when you look at these institutions that that have been turned into myths sometimes, like like going to church or going to the hospital, or calling the police if you're in trouble, or if you need help. Um, when you actually see, I would say as an adult, because when you're a child, that's what you're told to do. As an adult, when you see what these institutions actually do or don't do, then it kind of takes that veil, that magic from in front of your eyes, and you start realizing that the pastor doesn't really know you, and that the doctor isn't really there to cure you, and that when you call the cops, they're not really there to help you in whatever issue you're having. So it's just interesting, and that especially with COVID and just everything that's happening right now in society, it's making us rethink the way we approach problems, and it's almost making us better people, in the sense that we're acting from within, instead of trying to call an outside agent to come and help us.
Right. Yeah. Far out. Okay. I'm going to do a couple of sign outs, and then you're going to read from your book. By the way, your book is called The Milk of Your Blood, and it is available on Amazon. Do you have a website?
Yes, I do. It's basically my name, joseoseguera.com.
Okay.
And yeah.
Here's the book. There we go. I don't got a lot of light today. But it's on Amazon now. Can you buy it directly from your website?
Yeah, you can buy it from my website, and then my website is linked to the publisher's website, so you can buy it from there as well.
Okay, great. So, and your publisher is Kelsey Books?
Kelsey Books, yeah.
Yeah, right on, man, right on. So I'm going to do the little sign off, and then you're going to read. What are you going to read from the? Well, you can tell. Let me do the sign off, and then you'll tell us what you're going to read. So
okay,
thank you everybody for joining us and on the journey here. And it's danieloverberger.com. All the podcasts are there, as well as everywhere else. You can actually donate to my podcast there. If you're on the iTunes format, please like and share them with your friends. And just thank you for coming along and hearing everybody's story. And so Jose's going to read us what poem from your book?
This one's called Super Mario Brothers Coin, and it's a piece that I wrote when my wife and I went into the OBGYN for the very first time, and we got to see our son as on the ultrasound. And the reason I called it Super Mario Brothers Coin is because the way that the heartbeat looked, it was so tiny that it looked like the little coin from the Super Mario Brothers game. And it almost felt surreal. It didn't feel like it was actually happening. And it just, yeah, even when I think about it now, it doesn't seem real. Even when I look at him, I was like, I can't believe he's here. So it's Super Mario Brothers Coin. We're the most common item found in this 2-bit overworld. But as we warped down the ultrasonic tunnel black, what I saw was a rather uncommon glow. It was a life, too fragile still to keep, strong in its ability to be there, its inability to stay. A cheap resting in water's deepest calm, dreaming dreams I could never dream of dreaming. A grain of sand found in the infinity of our oceans, a memory, a fantasy, and a wish latticed into a riddle. How can an 8-bit cluster of achromatic pixels, flickering 127 beats per minute, a treasure glimmering as undeniably as gold, make you feel more animal than human? I squeezed your hand as tight as my mistrust of questions that change depending on the answer, and saw that same rare light in your eyes.
Right on, man. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing the stories and the book, and congratulations on the publication of all your That's a big feat, man. It's hard to
Thank
get
you.
poetry published, man. So
Yeah.
totally wicked and totally awesome. Last thing I always ask people, anything you want to tell the world?
Yeah, just first of all, I want to thank you, Dan, for having me on your podcast. I'm a huge fan of your work. I always try to do come out back when live yoga was still a thing. I would always try to come out and do your class. But yeah, if I could say one thing to the world is just be kind to one another. We're dealing with so many things all at once, and when that happens, we tend to get overloaded and try to do more than is possible. But right now, if we can just do one thing, is to be kind to one another and see our way through that we're going through, this situation we're going through.
Nice. Well, thank you, everybody. And I'm going to hit stop on this, and then we will hang on. Oh, wait a second. Oh, there it is. I lost the button. All right.